For those of you following my 286 build series, I had previously mentioned ordering an updated IDE interface card and also a RAM expansion card. I have received both of those cards in, populated them, and have them running. And I thought I would just quickly show these changes just so you kind of know where these changes were introduced into the system in the series. So this is what I'm labeling as version 0.03 of my IDE interface card. Very simple design, but basically the changes I had made was just to get rid of all the bodge wires. So my previous card had quite a few trace cuts and bodge wires as I was changing the design after I had received the initial PCB. But that's all cleaned up. I have no trace cuts, no bodge wires on this card at all. It did work as I populated it and installed it. And you can see that the CF card adapter, I basically used a 90-degree dual row pin header. It plugs into that. On the back of that, there is some foam, an insulating foam, and a little bit of adhesive that tacks it down so that it really will not come off of this card very easily. And then you can see I've tapped power from that little CF card adapter right into the PCB there, into that power header. And putting that into the system all works well. So that is what I'm currently going to be using for my IDE interface. If I decide to add a second drive later, I can do that. Another CF card off to the left. I don't know if I really need it. I'm right now using a small partition. I can go up to pretty large size-wise, I believe, on my CF card setup as I move forward. But this little 4 gig card will be more than I'll need for DOS. I also got into my RAM expansion. So this is that PCB. It's a 4 meg RAM expansion. A really pretty simple design. A couple of 74 245s down below, really to be transceivers for my data coming in or out of this card from the main bus, the ISA bus. To the upper left, I've populated the first 1 megabyte of this for testing. And for now, I'm not going to populate the other 3 meg. If I get to the point where I need that much memory, I'll add them. But I thought I'll just test 1 megabyte and see if I have any issues with that. So I have two 1/2 meg static RAMs for 1 meg. And then down in the bottom center here, this is a PSOC. And that PSOC is essentially doing all of the decode logic. So if I take a look over on my computer, this is the PSOC logic that I'm using for that. And the only thing I modified from the previous time I've shown this is this address. I decided to put this RAM card at the B0000 range. Previously, the only thing I had really being used in that range was my sound card's dual port RAM. And right now I'm not doing a lot with the sound cards, so I'm going to, for now, just use that 64K region for the window to get to this 4 meg RAM expansion card. Later, I will shrink my ROM BIOS, so instead of starting at C0000, I'll shrink it down to starting at D000 and place my sound card in a different address than my RAM expansion. And I did have suggestions from a couple of people about where to place the RAM expansion, that 64K, and right now I have it in a goofy spot, this B0000, but I can move it easily later. It's just a real quick flip of these 4 signals coming into this AND gate and then sending this update to that PSOC through the USB port. So very easy to change my addressing whenever I want to move this to a different area. For testing, I did plug it in just to my ISA slot through a little extension. That way I can lay it flat, do some probing. Initially, when I turned this on and did some probing, I found that it was not quite working right. And it ends up, if I pull up the schematic, I had one mistake on it. And for the 74 245 transceivers, the direction, I had accidentally wired that to I/O read instead of the memory read. So that was a mistake. So I really quickly made one tiny little trace cut and then ran a short little bodge wire that hooked pin 1 of these 2 ICs up to MRDC instead of the IOR, which is what I accidentally had wired it to previously. But then I did testing, and for the testing, I just wrote up some real quick assembly code. And if I look at my startup process, I basically called a procedure called test RAM card. And in that test RAM card, I go in and I access that B000 segment. And then within that, I want to go ahead and this might be a little confusing in my notes here, but access the first 64K segment in the 1 meg on my RAM card. So I have a register set up, and if I go back to that logic here, this is the logic that says pay attention to this address of 0x60. So in my code, I just simply set up that specific value to equal 60. So then if I do an IO out, I can write out to that register on my memory card, and I'm telling it that I want to access segment 0, and then I access segment 7 and segment 15. But once I'm in the segment, I then want to go to the address of 0000 within that segment, and I'm going to write out the value 0123. Then I'm going to jump out to another location within that segment and write out 3456. And I want to do a little bit of testing here. So I'm writing words at an even address, a word at an even address, a word at an odd address, which would be this FFFB, that's an odd address. And then I flipped to a different segment on the card, used the same 0000 for the address, but within that segment, segment 7. And I wrote out the value 789A. I went to an odd address, wrote out BCDE, and then I jumped to segment 15 and I wrote out a byte and a byte. So I wrote out a byte of DB and 55 to an even address to an odd address. And then I turn around and read it all back. So I go through and do all the updates, just some random locations, doing some word writes to even addresses, word writes to odd addresses, and then byte write to even, byte write to odd. And then I read back all those values and print them out to my LCD. And so then the result I get is this here, and I got back 0, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So as I go through this, there's my 0, 1, 2, 3, and my 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I've got my 789A, BCDE. And then I write out a byte and read back a DB and a 55. So this helps me validate that it is switching between segments on the 64K different segments, the 16 different segments on my memory card, because I am using the same address. So if it wasn't, when I came back up here, I'd expect to see a DB or something in that initial read. But this all seems to be working fine. So I'm flipping between 3 of the segments at least out of the 16, and I'm writing to both words and bytes, even and odd addresses, and that all seems to be coming back just fine. So with all the cards in the system, this is what it looks like at this point, and it's booting fine. All of my tests for post-tests are continuing to work. FreeDOS is loading just fine. And so the top card here is my video card. Right underneath that is my CF card, and you can see right here, this is where I would pull my CF card up and out. And then coming down 2 more slots is this new memory expansion card I put in. I've left a space in between the RAM expansion card and a CF card because that PSOC sticks up the way I put it in a header. If later I decide I want to compress these cards and put them slot to slot, in other words, have this RAM expansion card sit right beside the CF card, I'll just take out the raised header for the PSOC and just solder the PSOC right into the PCB, which isn't a big deal. But for now, I wanted to make it removable. And in case something wasn't working, I didn't want to desolder a PSOC off of this RAM expansion card. So at this point then, I think I can start trying to leverage that 1 meg of extra memory I put in here available through that 64K window. So I think some of the first things I'll do with this memory expansion is to try to use it in some of my video routines where I write video data temporarily to this memory and then can bring it back into the video card as I need to. Now it'll be nice when I get the 386SX in here. Hopefully that upgrade will work, because then I can have those there's two additional segment registers, and I can have one of them that's always pointing to this memory card basically. So now I can do pretty easy copies between the 64K of the window for RAM and the 64K video for my VRAM. So there's some things I might find handy with that. And if this does end up being handy and I want more than a meg, I'll just solder in another 2, 4, or 6 half meg static RAM chips into that card. So that's all for now. Just a short video showing those quick updates to my system.